Hello children, today I'll explain you the second part of the poem, fifth poem, and the name of the poem is The Legend of the Northland. In my previous video I explained you its first part and now I start with the second part. So here we have the next stanza, that is the ninth stanza. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as wafer, but she couldn't part with that. So children, as I explained you in my previous video, in the previous stanzas, that it's the story of a lady who was very greedy and selfish, who could never part with anything, who could never help anyone. And when Saint Peter came to her door and wanted a little cake because he was very hungry and was about to faint, she could not give him one. She made number of cakes one after another and tried to make as small as she could. But even then she could not give him any cake. So this time she tries taking a tiny scrap, only a little part of the dough which she had prepared for the cake, and rolled it to make it a very flat cake. But then when she baked it, she found that it was just like a wafer. But even then she could not give it to Saint Peter because she could not bear to give it free to Saint Peter. Now we have the 10th stanza. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away, so she put them on the shelf. And now she talks to herself that when she bakes a cake for herself and she herself eats them, she finds that the cake is too small. But when she is about to give it to someone else, the same cake appears to her to be very large. So in this way, she accepts that she is not ready for charity. She cannot give away anything, even a smallest cake, for charity. As a result, it happened that all the baked cakes, she had put them on the shelf and she left Saint Peter hungry and he was about to faint as ever before. Now let's see the next stanza. Then the good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And what happened that seeing her this behavior, seeing her being very greedy, Saint Peter grew very angry. One reason for his anger was that he was hungry since morning and was about to get faint. So he reacted in a very aggressive manner and he said, and this was very natural because such a woman, such a greedy woman was enough to make a saint like Saint Peter angry. And because of her inhuman behavior, it was very easy for her to provoke a saint like Saint Peter to become angry upon her. Now we come to the 12th stanza. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. Then Saint Peter calls her a selfish woman because she did not deserve all the comfortable life that was granted to her by God. Because God grants all the comfort and lovely things to those people who deserve them. But according to Saint Peter, she was a very selfish woman and she had a house, she had a good house for shelter. She was water to keep her clean. She had food to eat and fire to keep herself warm. All these things God had granted her, but according to Saint Peter, she did not deserve all these things. Now we come to the next stanza. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. Now, because Saint Peter was very angry upon the woman, he cursed her and told her that now she would be deprived of all the comforts God had given her, and now she would have to build herself a small nest as all mother birds do, and she would have to dig holes into the hard woods to get her food, that is, worms and insects upon which the birds feed. So she would have to be like a bird now, who would be digging holes into the hard wood, and she would be having her little food. Now let's see what happens in the next stanza. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. And soon after Saint Peter's words, people saw that the woman was changed into a bird, and immediately she was seen going up the chimney of her house, and she could not speak a single word, and she turned out to be a woodpecker who was seen flying out of her chimney. Now we come to the second last stanza. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. In this stanza, we are told that how a woodpecker has a scarlet cap, a red colored scarlet cap on its head. Now, what happened when the lady was turned into a woodpecker? At that time, before becoming a bird, she was wearing a red colored cap on her head. And when she went out of the chimney, all her clothes were burnt into ashes. But it was only the red scarlet cap which she wore remained the same. And except for that cap, all her clothes were destroyed in the chimney. So, it is because of that even today when we see a woodpecker, we see the same red scarlet cap on her head that the lady was wearing. Now here we have the last stanza. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees, till this very day, boring and boring for food. Now here in this stanza, the poet says that today every country school child sees a woodpecker boring into the wood, trying to eat their food, trying to have their scanty, a very little food, because the lady was very greedy. So now she was punished that she will have only a little food, because she was turned into a woodpecker, a bird who would get its food, but not easily, as the lady was given food and comfort by the God. But now, because she was a very self-centered, a selfish, a mean and greedy woman, she was turned into a bird, and she was punished in this way by God, that now she would have to get her food by doing a lot of hard work. And what would be the hard work? That she would be boring into the wood to get her food. That is why, children, this poem gives a good message. It says that we should not be selfish. We should not be so mean. We should be kind and generous to others instead of being self-centered all the time. Saint Peter says that we need that people should give us. We want to receive more and more whenever God gives us, but we never give to others. So, keeping this point into the mind, the poet has written this wonderful poem that teaches us a lesson that we should never be self-centered, or we should never be greedy. Instead, we should learn to give a little to others. That's all in today's video.